There are some names that send chills down your spine. Some killers become legends. Their crimes are dissected, analyzed, and obsessed over for decades. But what makes someone truly terrifying? Is it their brutality, their cruelty, or is it the fact that they could come for anyone? Ted Bundy targeted young women, Jeffrey Dahmer went after men, but Richard Ramirez killed with no pattern, no type, no warning. He was pure chaos. A man who could slip into your home in the dead of night, unannounced, unnoticed, and end your life. In the summer of 1985, Los Angeles was in the grip of terror. A faceless predator was moving through the city, attacking men, women, children, and the elderly. People went to sleep, fearing they'd wake up to find a stranger standing at the foot of their bed. Or worse, they wouldn't wake up at all. When police finally uncovered his identity, the world was shocked. And his name was
Richard Ramirez.
Richard Ramirez.
Richard Ramirez.
Richard
One
Ramirez.
of America's most notorious serial killers. Richard Ramirez.
He was 25 years old, a self-proclaimed Satanist, a sadistic serial killer, and a man whose childhood gave disturbing clues as to how he became the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 5 children. His mother, Mercedes, worked at a boot factory while she was pregnant, constantly inhaling toxic fumes. Many believe this may have contributed to the complications Richard would face as a child. His father, Julian Ramirez, was a strict man. A former police officer in Mexico turned railway worker, Julian had a short temper and an explosive rage. The Ramirez household was not a warm one. Punishment was swift, violent. His children learned quickly. When Julian was angry, they paid the price. But Richard was different from his siblings. He was quiet, withdrawn, and accident-prone. At just 2 years old, he was reaching for a radio when a heavy dresser fell on top of him, knocking him unconscious. 3 years later, he was playing at a park when a swing hit him hard in the head. Another concussion, more stitches. And then, the seizures started. At school, Richard would suddenly collapse, shaking, his body racked with convulsions. He was eventually diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition often linked to hallucinations, aggression, and violent outbursts. But this was just the beginning. At 12 years old, Richard found a new influence, one that would shape him into something far more dangerous than a troubled child. Miguel Ramirez, Mike, was Richard's older cousin, a Vietnam veteran, a decorated soldier, and a deeply disturbed man. When Mike returned from war, he brought with him stories of what he had done overseas, and he had proof. Photographs, photos of women he had harmed. Some were left in terrible conditions, others severely mistreated, and instead of hiding them, he bragged about them. He showed Richard how he had taken control over others, how he had watched the life drain from their eyes. And Richard, just a boy, listened, absorbed every detail, and then he watched it happen for real. One afternoon, Mike and his wife Jessie were arguing. It got heated. Jessie yelled at him, telling him he was useless. Mike grabbed a gun. Richard stood right there as Mike lifted his revolver and took her life. Blood everywhere. She collapsed instantly. Gone. For Richard, this moment changed everything. Mike was arrested, but he didn't serve time in prison. He was sent to a psychiatric hospital. But Richard was left to process what he had just seen on his own. And instead of being horrified, he was fascinated. He started reading about criminals, watching horror movies obsessively. He wanted to see more, and soon he did. By the time he was 15, Richard moved in with his older sister Ruth and her husband Roberto. And Roberto, he had a hobby. Every night he snuck out to spy on women through their windows. And Richard, he joined him. He learned how to move silently, how to stay in the shadows, how to watch without being seen. But soon, watching wasn't enough. He got a job at a Holiday Inn where a co-worker gave him a master key to every room. And that's when he took his first step into the darkness. At first it was theft. He'd sneak into rooms and steal valuables. But then one night he hid in a closet, waiting for a woman to return. When she stepped out of the bathroom, he attacked. He tried to assault her, but her husband walked in and beat Richard unconscious. The police were called, but the couple refused to testify, and Richard walked free. He grew more confident in his actions. At 18, he left Texas behind and boarded a bus to Los Angeles, where he would become a monster. It started small, breaking into homes, stealing cars, watching people from the shadows. But soon, that wasn't enough. By 1984, it escalated. On June 28th, Richard Ramirez entered the home of 79-year-old Jenny Vincow. He stabbed her repeatedly, then he slashed her throat so deeply she was nearly decapitated. And when police arrived at the scene, they found something else. A pentagram drawn on the wall. He wasn't just a killer. He was sending a message. And over the next year, that message would be heard loud and clear. On March 17, 1985, he struck again. 22-year-old Maria Hernandez was followed into her home in Rosemead, California. She tried to defend herself, raising her hands in front of her face as he fired. The bullet deflected off her keys and she managed to escape. But her roommate wasn't as lucky. He took her life without hesitation. That same night, he attacked 30-year-old Veronica Yu, pulling her from her car before pulling the trigger. 2 women in one night, and he was just getting started. The next week, 64-year-old Vincent Zazzara and his wife Maxine were targeted in their home. He shot Vincent as he slept, then turned his attention to Maxine. She fought back, tried to grab a shotgun from under the bed, but it wasn't loaded. Richard took his time, brutally attacking her before marking her body with a carved symbol. Police were stunned. There was no clear pattern, no single type of victim. Young, old, men, women, it didn't matter. And the way he left the scenes, it was sadistic, ritualistic. He wasn't just taking lives, he was spreading fear. Over the next months, it got worse. A husband and wife shot in their home, a woman assaulted while her children were locked in a closet, a 16-year-old girl kidnapped and attacked. He broke in through windows, sliding doors, even unlocked front doors. People started double-locking everything. Gun stores sold out overnight. Security systems became a must-have. LA was living in fear, and all the while Richard Ramirez kept moving. In the early months of the attacks, police were baffled. The crimes seemed completely random. Different weapons, different methods, different victims. Some were shot, others were bludgeoned or strangled. Some homes were burglarized, others weren't touched beyond the violence. For a while, investigators believed they were dealing with multiple criminals, each with their own twisted motives. The breakthrough in the case came from an unlikely source, a single footprint. At multiple crime scenes, investigators found the same distinct shoe print. An Avia sneaker, a rare brand at the time. Forensics determined that the tread pattern matched footprints left behind at the homes of several victims, proving that these seemingly random attacks were, in fact, connected. Detectives traced the shoe to only one distributor in Los Angeles. When they checked the sales records, they discovered something chilling. Only one pair in that size had been sold in the entire area. It was the first real lead, the first undeniable connection between the attacks. The city was still trapped in fear, but the net was finally closing in. On August 31st, 1985, Ramirez had just returned to Los Angeles from Arizona, completely unaware that his face had been plastered on every newspaper and TV screen in the city. He walked into a liquor store in East Los Angeles, where he saw people staring at him. Then he saw his own mugshot on the front page of the newspaper, and he panicked. Realizing that everyone knew who he was, he ran out of the store and tried to carjack a woman, Angie De La Torre. Her husband, Manuel De La Torre, saw Ramirez attacking her and grabbed a metal pipe. He beat Ramirez over the head, forcing him to run. Ramirez sprinted through the neighborhood, trying to steal multiple cars, but residents weren't letting him escape. By the time police arrived, Ramirez had been beaten bloody and was begging for protection.
As we told you earlier, the man believed to be the walk-in killer was caught through the efforts of some very alert and very involved citizens. Elizabeth Anderson reports the residents of Boyle Heights are very proud of their heroic efforts.
Earlier today, the residents here on Hubbard Street were filled with fear. Not anymore. Now the streets are filled with excitement. That's because the walk-in killer prime suspect was captured on Hubbard Street this morning. As soon as the word got out, hundreds of curious onlookers drove past the neighborhood. None of them could believe the prime suspect had been arrested in their own backyard. Manuel de la Torre is being called a hero. He ran to his wife's rescue today when he saw another man hitting his wife while pulling her out of her gold Granada. That's when Torres grabbed a lead pipe and began hitting that man, who eventually turned out to be the prime walking killer suspect. De la Torres tells his story as his friend Robert Alvarez translates. A lot of people think he's a hero. How does he feel about that?
¿Cómo te sientes? ¿Crees que quieres ser rey? No.
No, not a hero?
No, yo siento like a hero.
De la Torres was protecting his wife Angie de la Torres, who was still filled with fear. Faustino Pignon is another hero in this neighborhood. Earlier today, he chased after the same suspect after he claims Ramirez was trying to steal his red Mustang. And even though he says he was being threatened with a gun, Pignon fought that suspect anyway.
And then I got him by the neck.
Got him by the neck, and then what?
Then we struggled back and forth for the car. He was going forward and back with the car.
Maria Marijo's face tells her story. She is still filled with shock because it was her daughter, Angie de la Torre, who was accosted in her own car by Ramirez.
Richard Ramirez wasn't just another serial killer. He was a monster that thrived on chaos, and his trial reflected that perfectly. The case against him was ironclad. DNA evidence, ballistics, fingerprints, and multiple survivors who identified him in court. But Ramirez, he wasn't afraid. On day one, he walked into the courtroom, lifted his hand, and revealed a pentagram drawn on his palm. Then he said it. "Hail Satan." That moment alone sent shockwaves through the courtroom. This wasn't just a trial, it was a spectacle. Outside the courthouse, fans gathered. Women sent him love letters, nudes, and even attended every session.
They are the women in black, admirers of Richard Ramirez.
Why were you in the courtroom today?
I just wanted to see what he looked like. I think he's cute.
This woman, who gave her name only as Paige, calls herself a Satanist. She says Ramirez has written letters to her and that she's talked with him in jail.
Everyone makes him look so bad, you know, but I know that he's a nice person because I've met him, and I know.
He's convicted of 13 murders.
I know. But he's really a nice guy. It's very out of the usual. It's very out of the norm to be able to do that for a certain amount of time and length, a period of time, and get away with it. Especially the outrageousness of it, the kind of murders that he did.
But after 4 years of legal battles, the verdict was in. On September 20th, 1989, Richard Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assaults, 14 burglaries, and when the judge handed down 19 death sentences, the most ever in California history, Ramirez barely reacted. His response, he never showed an ounce of remorse.
He has one final comment for the media.
Big deal. That's always went with the territories. I'll see you in Disneyland.
Ramirez was sentenced to death in the gas chamber, but instead of execution, he became a twisted celebrity on death row. Doreen Leoy was a 41-year-old magazine editor who believed he was innocent. She wrote him over 75 love letters, visited him every week, and in 1996, they got married, right there on death row. She even vowed to take her own life if Ramirez was ever executed. But execution never came. On June 7, 2013, at age 53, Richard Ramirez died behind bars. Not by lethal injection, not by the gas chamber, but by cancer. After 23 years on death row, the Night Stalker was gone. Without ever answering for his crimes, some say justice was never truly served. Others believe he suffered in his own way. But one thing is certain. Richard Ramirez was one of the most brutal and infamous serial killers in American history. And in the end, time itself was the only thing that could stop him.